Alrighty, hello everyone. Welcome back to yet another episode of my nonsense and probably also eventually something of Belong's nonsense. And now I am apparently speedrunning, or rather trying to chase a record for the most amount of shit I've ever gotten done in a day. But hey, and today especially we have a really interesting topic that I wanted to talk about, and that is something someone suggested, which is rather than doing ex-witch to Christian testimony, let's take a look at the other side of the story here. Let's look at ex-Christian to witch testimony and see if we can maybe figure out, you know, the side that no one ever talks about. Why someone would leave Christianity, what would happen to them that would cause such a thing. I've got a bunch of stories, and many thanks to my followers and everyone for, you know, commenting when I posted some videos and giving their stories for me to share. And we're going to read some of these together, we're going to look at them, and we're going to see if we can connect any pieces here. Before we do get into all that though, hello, my name is Sara Rastres, and I am a Christian witch content creator, writer, educator, specifically a writer of these two books right here. So if you're saying to yourself, Christian witch, that's not possible, oh my goodness, you can't do that, well, here you go. Start with some scholarship, and when you're done and you've got questions, then come back. We're always at that point. We're always at that point where folks want to say, but you can't do this, as if I haven't been doing it for 14 years consistently. And that's understandable to not know how this works. That's why these books exist. It's also why all of these videos exist. So if you don't want to grab those just yet, go ahead and like the video, subscribe, and ring the bell, because we post content like this every single Friday so that you can get a better understanding of all this stuff as well. And if you do like my work and you want to support it more, you can always head over to my Patreon, where you can get all these videos 2 weeks early and ad-free, and a lot of other stuff every single week. So when I think about ex-witch to Christian stuff, I was going to go shop around, fish around, and look for a bunch of videos, but honestly, I don't think I have to, if only because a lot of people just commented directly and shared their stories with me, which again, very much appreciate that, because that's the kind of stuff we're looking for. The real accounts of people who have been in the Christian church and for whatever reason have decided to leave it. And the testimony we're going to start with is actually one that is pretty near and dear to me. And this is actually the story of my fiance's sibling. My fiance's sibling is actually the reason that I do what is called kitchen witchcraft, which is doing a lot of witchcraft with the herbs and spices that you would use in everyday cooking, right? Basil and clove and all those things. They're the one that showed me how to do that and what it means, what it looks like, and also taught me a little bit of how to cook, especially way back in the day when we were all in college and I was learning how to live for the first time. So we're going to start here. Here is our first testimony written up for us, and we're just going to read it like so. So I was raised mostly Baptist. My mother was a self-described born-again Christian, and I was brought to her church every Sunday. My dad's side is Ukrainian Catholic, and I was baptized and confirmed through his church. I like to think that his side is mostly culturally or socially Catholic, with religion not really emphasized so much as the participation in that community. And this is something, you know, knowing my fiance and his sibling, I can kind of attest to, though I would say that, you know, they obviously believe it and stuff too, but very much church is a community thing. It's a community of Ukrainian Catholics up here. So that's also pretty cool. But anyway, my weekly exposure to church was my mother's decision. I attended Sunday school with the rest of the children. I have distinct memories as a child, while being indoctrinated, that I had many questions about the things I was being taught. I was a smart kid. Cough, autistic cough. There were instances where I identified some inconsistencies between various passages from scripture and what the instructor was teaching us. I was filled with questions about how dinosaurs fit into the creation story. I remember not making sense of how the human population could have increased from just 2 humans, pointing out the inconsistencies of Adam and Eve's sons being able to marry another human who has their own village and parents and family. It is true. Basically, everyone gets kicked out of Eden. There's supposed to only be 4 humans on Earth: Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel. And yet when Cain murks Abel, he goes and gets a wife. From where? Who fucking knows? Welcome to the Bible. But anyway. Whenever I asked about certain things, I was heavily discouraged from questioning both the Word of God and the teacher. I was always left with the impression that the teacher didn't know a whole lot about what they were talking about beyond the curriculum they were given to deliver us. It never got to the point where I was outright punished for asking questions, but I remember feeling as though the teacher in the entire class was judging me. I was supposed to trust what I was being told, to have faith. It never sat right with me, but I wanted to avoid feeling ashamed for thinking for myself. This had a big impact on how I would later participate in regular school during class discussions, but I digress. My mother wanted desperately to raise me right, and by this she meant as a Christian, to do everything in her power to make sure I subscribed to the same religion. For me, her parenting was deeply enmeshed with the increasingly more extremist religious beliefs that she had. For my birds and bees discussion, she brought me on a little vacation to New Hampshire to spend the weekend with her in a hotel room. During the drive there, she made me listen to tapes about how, self-fun is a sin, that any kind of pleasure was a gift from God intended to be shared with just your husband, all those fucked up, would you want a piece of gum that was already chewed sort of metaphors. All of this led me to develop a seriously fucked up relationship with pleasure, sexuality, and desire that I am still healing from to this day. There was no actual factual information about reproductive organs or, the time of the month or anything in these tapes, just shame-inducing indoctrination being the facade of being a good Christian. Or behind the facade, rather. Whatever the hell that meant. I attended Bible camps, which I thought were fun at the time. Looking back now, it is chilling how effective the manipulation of these camps were. They took a bunch of teens and preteens, forbid them from having cell phones or contact with the outside world. We couldn't call our parents, making them stay up late, sometimes pulling all-nighters, providing a lot of fun activities to do, and before feeding us, making us sit down in an auditorium to listen to someone share some deeply emotional and personal stories about their struggles and how everything was fixed by coming to God. Then we were encouraged to go forward in front of everyone to get prayed over or saved. The week I spent here successfully pulled me back into Christianity and made me feel guilty for ever questioning. I remember the high from that week fading, similar to con crash, like, from conferences, right? Yeah, conferences and conventions and things like that. The doubt creeping back in because of the crash and really lacking the support or aftercare to navigate this. And I think at this time I internalized the belief that this crash was my fault. Like I wasn't a good Christian for not being able to hold on to the emotional high I experienced during Bible camp. As I became a teenager, my mother became increasingly more strict with her religion and parenting. I went back and forth with doubt and belief and being deeply intense mental self-punishment for slipping into doubt. I remember the guilt, how strong that took root, and is still rooted. As a teen, though, breaking free of the mental hold became more possible, and with the added typical need to rebel. I was frustrated with my mother. Felt like she expected perfection, and this went hand in hand with religion that she would wield as the moral right that excused her behavior towards me. I was sick of the contradictions, both with her and her brand of religion. Around this time, I borrowed a book from a friend, The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, which I found both fascinating and validating in equal measure. It opened up a new world of healthy skepticism for me that was particularly formative for how I approached thinking about organized religion and the influence on the globe. My mother was not pleased when she found this book, and if it wasn't for the fact that I'd borrowed it from someone, she would have physically destroyed it. My extremely brainwashed and narcissistic mother could not handle me trying to explore my sense of self. The emotional abuse fueled by religious zeal, she projected herself into my life's potential so hard she punished me for not conforming to what she believed in. I remember as a teen her barging into my room and trying to tear my covers off me in bed to get me to go to church with her. I remember looking into laws regarding what parents were permitted to force their children to do, and I vaguely remember that they can't exert that kind of control after a child turns 16. So this is where I dug my heels in more about not going. My mom lost her mind, frequently had meltdowns and tantrums about her just trying to do what was best for me, blah blah blah. She read my diary, where I would talk about various romantic feelings, sometimes towards people of the same gender. She purchased and left for me on my bed a book about how homosexuality was a sin. I threw it out. She sat me down in the car with her before letting me onto the school bus to make me listen to another tape about how, self-enjoyment is sinful. It was deeply awkward. I could not shake a sense of shame toward myself and my body. I briefly described myself as an atheist around this time because I came to reject the Christianity that I saw as a hate-filled and contradictory religion that was a lot more about what a bunch of humans felt were right than a supposedly all-loving God. However, as a deeply spiritual individual, I still had a draw to the metaphysical in my life. I had a sense that the world was filled with unseen energies, magic if you will, that didn't feel like something that could be strictly defined in human terms. I wondered what came before Christianity, learning of its history and researching other religions. I took some time exploring Buddhism, which still has an influence over my life now. I wanted to know what came before the more structured religions. Eventually, came into contact with nature worshipping practices. Ultimately, this led me to Wicca as a more formal introduction into witchcraft, albeit a very specific definition. My first witchcraft book was Teen Witch by Silver Ravenwolf. This edition specifically. My mom did eventually find out about this, somewhere between going through my room while I wasn't home and or reading my diary. She was convinced that it meant I was worshipping the devil. I wanted so much to explain to her that Wiccans didn't even believe in the devil. Something important that I have come to understand is that witchcraft itself is not a religion. It is a method for interacting with the metaphysical world. One can utilize witchcraft while practicing their religion, but the two things are not the same. Religion I define as a set of spiritual beliefs. It may or may not include deities. Religion is more like the who and the why, and witchcraft is the art of how. It was through my research It was through my search through religions that I encountered more flexibility with the art of the how, and thus began my journey through witchcraft. My first spell was to cast a circle of protection and banish negativity. I wanted to make a safe space in my bedroom amid the emotional abuse from my mother. I was particularly in tune with the feeling of energy. Emotion, yes, very physically. They were like waves, a current. I liked the idea of being able to tap into this energy and guard against it. It made sense to me that things in the world were containers for energy. I had various ways of conceptualizing this. Emotion felt like an energy one could utilize to manipulate their surroundings. Anger to charge a crystal, for example. I could get a sense for the feeling contained in a house, and if it was perhaps haunted. Did this place contain a lot of yelling for most of its lifespan? I imagined that anger floating up and sticking to the attic like cobwebs soaking into the walls. Important note for later. I thought that perhaps a god could be given power through the belief that humans offered, a concentration of this energy, of this intent. The sum of the intent of how many humans over how many years created something, maybe. Perhaps I believed in all gods with humanity creating them. Eventually, I moved away from Wicca. I never really felt great about all the structure that reminded me a lot of the rigidity that I came to associate with Christianity. I noticed a lot more heteronormativity that felt weird and out of place, i.e. the fivefold kiss. And as I learned more about myself as a non-binary person, I very much did not enjoy all of the gender ascribed to things like herbs and energies. Today I just refer to myself as a witch. I suppose more formally my style is eclectic. I don't involve deities in my practice. I do sometimes interact with spirits and entities. I'm still very interested in pre-Christian folklore practices and beliefs. So, I am familiar with that story to an extent, although it is interesting to get a more, direct and broad view. But right away, and especially, yes, I have met this mother in question. Oh my god, this woman. And this is definitely where I want to start because it's not only someone that I'm familiar with, it's also something I have kind of seen firsthand, but obviously not lived to the depth that my fiance or his sibling have. And this entire story immediately hits on so many notes that start so young, and that is on manipulation. Right away, I noticed immediately, oh, you didn't get to eat before they made you listen to all of these really emotionally charged and difficult stories, and all these things of hunger and then relief, basically. Hunger for God and then relief. This is an emotional manipulation tactic. This is something where you are a captive audience. You can't go anywhere, and you are not well fed, you are not energized, you don't have the ability, you are both physically and mentally weakened by your own hunger, and therefore have to kind of listen, have to just kind of go with the flow a little bit more.
Cry Night is the quintessential experience of church camp. So picture this. You roll up in a giant van filled with teenagers who have all been raised to feel guilty for literally anything they think, say, or do, because all humans are sinful and unworthy of the glory of God. And you're stuck in a cabin filled with girls and a youth leader that's just a really enthusiastic millennial Christian who really wants you to think that being a Christian is super cool. So the first night is all about the fun and the games. They get you running. They get you overstimulated. They get you exhausted. You're doing minute to win it games like no one has ever seen before. You're probably doing something borderline illegal, borderline child endangerment, but nobody cares. That's not the point. Someone will probably get injured and need to sit out for the rest of camp. Then you're sent to bed with some kind of message to ponder. That usually leaves you awake at night pondering what you could possibly be doing outside of church camp that displeases God, which is everything. The next day, the same thing. Some kind of biblical-based game, lots of team bonding, lots of social interaction, very little time to yourself, except for the repeated messages that remind you to feel guilty for existing. This continues for a couple of days. You get sent to bed, once again, with a message causing you to ponder something that makes you feel guilty, and then the last night comes. You have some kind of intense game night with lots of noise, and then you basically have like a laser light worship show where everybody is clapping and singing and being really loud, and then the slow music starts playing. It's probably an instrumental version of either Oceans or Overwhelmed, and then the speaker comes up and is like, hey, so I know a lot of you guys have a lot on your minds, a lot going on at home in your lives, and there's probably a lot of you in this room right now that have some things that you haven't even told anybody, that you're just afraid to bring to the cross. And I need you to know that this is a place where you can confess that to God. You can lay your sins down at the cross. And if you just have something on your heart tonight that you've been wanting to tell God, I just want you to come up here and let us lay hands on you in prayer. And so then nobody will go up for a really long time until somebody eventually will feel so guilty that they make their way up and have people lay hands on them. And then everybody starts going up and getting hands laid on them. And then the overstimulation from the entire week sets in and everybody just starts crying because it's the first time you've really been able to sit and feel your guilt. But if you were in a girl's cabin, there was another layer of cry night, where after this worship session happened, you went back to your cabins and you would sit in your bunk and basically go around in a circle and trauma dump on each other. And it was like the most intense game of trauma Olympics I've ever played in my entire life. And by the time everyone was done trauma dumping on each other, we would just be sobbing because we were trauma dumping on each other. And then you'd leave and be like, I'm a changed person. And then just repeat the same process at the next church camp. 10 commandments out of 10. Highly recommend.
That is extremely manipulative and fucked up to do to anyone, never mind children. But a lot of things pop out to me in this, right? We see a lot of the typical stuff. Pastors or Sunday school teachers who don't actually know what the hell they're talking about and refuse to answer questions. And because they don't know, it's much easier to make people who do ask questions feel shame and feel outcasted than it is to find answers, right? Which, the churches I go to now, when I have a question, the priests are like, oh, I'm not sure about that. Let me get back to you. Or we talk about it. This whole concept of you're bad for asking questions, though, is definitely something that seems to show up more in denominations that don't value proper academic rigor as much. So there's that, right? We have a perfect example of blind leading the blind in there. And more than that, a lot of the complexes that show up, right? I notice a lot of the issues around, right, one's relationship with their body because of a lot of the doctrines around, self-pleasure, pleasure in general, LGBTQ related things. This is just a lot of compounding rules and restrictions and very rigid and, dare I say, toxic and abusive ideologies, hateful ideologies that weave together basically a cage for the mind. And it seems that it's through witchcraft that my fiance's sibling got out of that. My fiance, on one hand, went complete atheist. He disavowed the whole thing entirely, never believed in magic, never believed in any of that kind of stuff to begin with, but lost faith over time from childhood onward into just straight atheism and just kind of disavow the whole concept of anything believing. So he'll look at Christians and witches alike and be like, it's all silly and it's all nonsense. But his sibling did kind of go down that other path of like trying to work with that energy. And it's really interesting also to see that working with this energy, setting up this boundary, yes, from a magical perspective, definitely works. But also from a psychological perspective, is literally putting up that mental boundary between your mental state and someone else's, detaching from, a parent who is displaying narcissistic behavior, who is doing really manipulative things to try and browbeat their children into certain behavior, all these kinds of things. We're starting off with this one. And again, I can attest to this person, this mother figure, doing some very interesting things, and just having very interesting behavior, so behavior that has my mother and I both standing there like, what the hell was that about, right? And that in itself is a lot to unpack, right? But that's a long first story, and definitely one worth talking about. But the next one, though, now this one is a video by Katie Jane Weaver, responded to my call for stories. So let's see what Katie has to say.
Hey y'all. So for those of you that do not know, I am an eclectic witch and pagan, and I do work with Jesus, okay? And I just kind of wanted to touch on my story about how Jesus came into my life at a very early point in time. Even though I was shown a very false image of him, he was there. Stopped the timer at 2:02. So I was raised with my parents on my mom's side of the family up north until I was about 13 years old. From that point till about 19 years old, I was in foster care, okay? When I was about 8 years old, we lived in this house, and now that I look back at it, oh my gosh. There's so many not so nice spirits attached to that place. Something bad happened there. Hold on. Something doesn't want me speaking. Anyway, something bad happened there. So that caused a lot of fear within me, even though I didn't realize that that was what was causing the fear.
So I'm going to quick pause. So now this is our second mention also of energies being able to sit in the house. I said remember that for later. It's actually my fiance's sibling that I did my first exorcism with. We were exorcising a house, and it's interesting that they mentioned that kind of angry feeling floating up like cobwebs, because I remember being in the house we were exercising and looking up in the corners, and it felt like I was looking in a hornet's nest. Like, it felt like, oh my god, there is something in here that has coagulated into such an angry, buzzing presence that it was just like, ooh, no. So it's interesting also, like, people who are going from Christianity to witchcraft have these experiences of, like, feeling something there. Like, feeling that something is happening. So, all right.
And you know, on top of that, I had my parents fighting. You know, they were addicts, alcoholics, bringing people into the house that I never seen in my entire life. I had an addict living in the basement that was selling, who wasn't nice to me. Okay, so little me, my nervous system was very wrecked. Okay, and I had a huge fear of the devil and demons. And that gave me nightmares on a nightly basis. So I was dealing with a lot emotionally, internally, at 8 years old. So one night I had a good dream. You know, nice change of pace. And it was Jesus. He was with me and a bunch of other kids, and we were running around and playing and having fun. You know, sometimes he appeared as like this cartoon character. Sometimes he appeared as an older man with dark skin, and sometimes he appeared as a younger man with dark skin. And when the time came for me to finish the dream and wake up, he told me it's time for me to go. And I started crying. I said, please don't leave me. Please don't leave me. And he came up to me and he wrapped me in his arms. And I can't even begin to explain to you the feeling I got. It was the best embrace I had ever experienced. Ever. And it was in the dream realm. But anyways, he embraced me and he said, I will never leave you. Everything is going to be okay. Sorry. 3:13 on the clock. Everything's going to be okay. You keep being a good girl. Jesus isn't who you think he is. And that goes for both ends of the spectrum. Whether you're an evangelical or, oh, a hummingbird. Hold on. Y'all see that? It's a hummingbird. Oh my god. Hey, buddy. Oh, I need to get a feeder out here. Anyway, whether you're a Christian or whether you are a pagan, your idea of Jesus, it's not what you think it is. Jesus is the embodiment of love. Jesus is the embodiment of justice. And let me tell you, that man has a heart for children. He has a heart for children. I'm going to be tagging Sarah Rasterson in this because I saw a video where she wanted to see ex-Christian to witch experiences, and this, you know, it was a big part of my journey, because for a while I became bitter toward the church, and it caused me to become bitter toward God and toward Jesus for a hot minute. But I had to let go of that, and oh my goodness, the journey I'm on right now. It's amazing. But I just wanted to share that. Y'all have a good day.
All right, so geez, you know, yeah, catch me getting a little misty-eyed over here, but okay, right? So that's one of those which and this person, right, says eclectic witch and pagan. Okay, so the magical pumpkin, on top of that experience with Jesus that we got, this was also a comment that was left on my request for it. So I was raised Southern Baptist. I was taught that I was nothing and only God can make me good. I was an evangelical for years and didn't realize how brainwashed I was until my 30s. Because of that, I endured abuse and stayed because I wasn't allowed to leave because it was a sin. I could go on, but the path of the witch has helped me see my self-worth and the worth of others. I'll never go back, right? So in conjunction, right? So we have this, I'll never go back to Christianity, but I know Jesus, and I know Jesus is good. So it's interesting to me, right? Reading all of these stories out, it's really, really interesting to me, because so many times you'll get these Christians hear the word witch and they'll be like, you need to go back to Jesus, you need to this and that and the other thing. But again, maybe it's just because this is a more Christian witchy space, but there are many people who don't consider themselves Christians at all, who never really left Jesus, who never walked away from him to begin with, might have struggled at some points, right? Like some folks are saying, struggled with the bitterness, the why are you not doing anything? Why am I suffering like this kind of thing, right, about God? We're told God is all powerful. We're told God is all loving. And then we just get time and time again situations that make us look at that idea sideways. So, you're right, still actively doing witchcraft, still actively pagan, doesn't identify as Christian, but still had that experience with Jesus. And there's a lot to unpack there. And first of all, you know, for my friend there, I'm very sorry that you had to deal with that kind of upbringing, because that is rough. No child should have to be in that kind of situation whatsoever. But it is interesting, right, that we see Jesus saying like, oh, hey, I gotta dip for a second. And, you know, this kind of idea of like, I'm never going to leave you. That is a recurring thing of Jesus. And so, you know, when she says, hey, whether you're Christian or pagan, Jesus is not who you think he is. I feel that, because just listening to how Jesus is interacting with her, how he's appearing to her in this dream. Yeah, that's the Jesus I know. The Jesus I know is not concerned with how you're identifying. The Jesus I know is not concerned with like what camp you're falling into spiritually, but rather what camp you're falling into morally, right? Where it's like, are you willing to stand with the downtrodden? Are you willing to, help the oppressed? Those are the camps ever in the Bible he's dividing people into, by the way. And not just people, but entire nations. How did you treat the least of you? Because that's how he's going to measure you. Not by whether you're Christian or not by if you believe any kooky, goofy things like we saw these Baptists believe in my fiance's siblings' testimony, but by that measure. And so, you know, it's interesting that, like, we're seeing here Jesus is still with this person. Jesus is a friend of this person regardless. And so that's one of those testimonies, those experiences that also show us a little bit of that kind of divination, of divinity coming to one in a dream and giving that strength to that person to kind of help them through seriously tough times. Anyway, I wanted to go through some of the comments people left for me as well, though, right? And so a lot of people, right, we've got people saying, you know, I've never left this situation. We got people saying like, I love your content because it bridges two experiences, right? And this is exactly what I was getting at with my last time. It's not about switching sides. It's about getting a look at the bigger picture. But We got, right, Sarah over here saying, I'm ex-Christian mostly. I deconstructed my Christianity after doing a Bible study group with my church. What is the Bible by Rob Bell, Unleash the Beast? I had an epiphany on how scripture has been manipulated for control. Oh boy, yes it has. And to oppress. I soon got into tarot and led to research Hecate. Also, Archangel Michael is close in my practice. I've been researching and building upon my clairsenses and unlocked parts of myself I couldn't in my previous faith. So this happened during COVID. So really now my spirituality is a mix of influences, and Hecate has helped introduce me to a lot of other deities and ascended masters of the sort. So it's been really cool. Okay, right? So that's one of those kind of more short and sweet ones. But once again, we're seeing like, hey, things are not clicking. Things are not quite lining up the way that the church said they should. And hold on a moment. Now I need to go investigate. It seems that this is now a second time we're seeing that the church is really doing some damage to its own goals by refusing to honestly and curiously and openly engage with the realities of the spiritual world, which are far beyond a black and white mentality most people give them, right? Oh, it's either God or it's the devil. There's lots of shades of gray in between that, and there's lots of different spirits who really could give a fuck about either, to be honest. But so okay, right? Doing our own research, kinds of things. Archangel Michael is still here, is the notable part. We'll also notice that angels on top of Jesus, angels will also just kind of not really care what people identify as religiously. If they got something to tell you, they will tell you. Yep. So that scans. Zmiana says, okay, I was raised in a very religious Greek Catholic environment, and the people were lovely, but I sort of never felt anything really from traditional prayer, and the way God was described just seemed like he would not like me anyway. Well, that's interesting. Okay, so, right, just that feeling of not belonging. One part of it was the fact that I have always been drawn to witchcraft, folk practices, or paganism. In the end, I just sort of settled not to personally make a covenant I could not properly keep. Mother Mary is still around, though, and she definitely brought me to a better understanding and appreciation of her son. So some people are just always being drawn to these things, always being pulled towards it. Clearly, they are not meant for the type of worship that everyone is supposed to have according to the church. And I think this is something important also that, like, is the reason we have so many denominations of Christianity in the first place. There are billions of people on this planet. They're not all going to approach divinity the same way, and the idea that we should all approach divinity the exact same way is a great way to stifle actual true personal connection with divinity, with God, or with anyone else that people might go to. So that's definitely interesting. And again, Mother Mary is another one who just doesn't care about how people identify. She's more about like, hey, my son is here to teach this, not really like, you must follow my son no matter what. It's more like, you need to follow what my son is putting down back here, because my son's putting down the goods of like, be nice to people, right? So that's interesting. Ashant says, I was born into a Christian family, was forced into going to church and never made friends, but my parents insisted to go to different churches until I can make a friend. Didn't get lucky and stuck to Calvary. I was actually, I think, meant to say bullied in the youth extreme team because the pastor's daughter had lice and I had to leave early. Or maybe does mean bullying, I don't know. But I was that kid who did a project for World Fair on neo-paganism when I was 12. I collected rocks everywhere. Oh, hey, me too. I also always loved all things fantasy and magic and collecting rocks and pretending they were power stones. Raise your hand if you went from Christian to witch just because, man, the concept of all that whimsy and fun just had a chokehold on you, because I know it did for me. I was raised with it. My mom always had the fairies and, statues of stuff all over and fairy tales, and loved wizards and magic and stuff. So like, it was just so much fun. All right, so Blue River Lotus says, as a kid hearing that God was all love and forgiveness, I prayed that he would forgive Lucifer and other souls in hell, only to be told by a priest that I, a 6-year-old, was torturing any soul I had been praying for, till I started crying. What the fuck? What kind of priest is that? That is what you're supposed to... Okay. Anytime I would question something that didn't make sense, I was told to shut up and just accept the Bible or what the Bible says, the priest and practitioners alike saying my physical abuse was justified and the resulting PTSD wasn't real, or it was just demons trying to turn me away from my parents, even had an exorcism over it. Oh boy, more spiritual abuse being masked as just spirituality in general. That is awful. I am sorry, my friend. Then there was me coming out as gay, and the verses they threw at me for that. Yep, and if you want to know how to talk about those verses, God and the Gay Christian is a great resource for that by Matthew Vine. That's very much an apologetic on why it's fine to be gay and like people are just crazy. When I was going through the process of confirmation, I told the bishop I didn't want to go through with it, and I was guilted by everyone to go through with it, or I'm just accepting my fate in hell. I felt completely alone, and the God that was supposed to love me and protect me was nowhere to be found and actively against me. It wasn't until after I left the church and looked back years later that I can see God as the deity and not as whatever Christians say he is. But I will never go back to the church. I love the gods I follow now, and they plus therapy are helping me overcome the religious trauma that still affects me. So once again, my friend, I'm so sorry that you had to deal with that, because that is ridiculous. That sounds like a horrible place. And I'm hearing priest and bishop, and I can only assume it's a liturgical tradition, like Catholic or Lutheran or Episcopal, something like that. And that's just not right. Again, once again, right, this idea of an all-loving God. We're supposed to believe in this all-loving God. We're supposed to have this, but then the way people introduce God to people and push God on people is anything but. So, A Rose is Rising, saying, my spiritual journey was all over the place, starting since childhood, but long story short, my eyes were finally opened after I escaped an extreme fundamentalist Christian cult at the age of 24, 25, after being brainwashed out of my inherent spirituality and lesbianism, yes, even as a young adult, only to return home to myself and embrace that I can still be a follower of Jesus, a witch, and fully myself as God created me to be. It has been a long journey of deconstructing almost everything I was taught or fear-mongered into believing. The freedom and peace of no longer turmoiling in my spirit to the point of wanting to self-delete has no comparison. That last part is really interesting, because if we notice other ex-witch to Christian testimonies, there seems to be a crossover here. The ex-witches to Christians, they're talking about how they felt dark, they felt stressed, they felt overwhelmed. Craft of Christ over there talking about being demonically possessed and attacked and, all this kind of stuff. Basically wanting also to self-delete or things like that. They felt that and got better in Christianity. But as we can see here, there is a truth that some people feel that in Christianity and only get relief from that when they get out. And so more than that, extreme fundamentalist cults are high control religions, very, very strict and rigid religions that are not good. I'm going to keep bringing this book up probably till the day I die, When Religion Hurts You by Laura E. Anderson. They're not good for your mental at all. They're not good for your critical thinking. They're not good for your sense of safety, right? They are very good at just keeping you in fight or flight and deactivating your critical thought process. They're built on shame. They're built on pack mentality and herd behavior. So yeah, again, I'm sorry, my friend. I'm sorry that you got there. But now this is probably just because my page is a Christian witch page, but we notice a lot of people who are pagans or who, identify as Christian witches, they do all the witch stuff still having God, Jesus, Mary, Archangel Michael somewhere around. And that's because I've actually heard a lot of stories of people who have nothing to do with Christianity anymore, who still encounter Christ, who still encounter Mary, and it's a completely chill situation because of exactly what these people are saying. Jesus is nothing like the way a lot of high control religion portrays him to be. He's really not like this, evangelical egregore type that we've talked about a few times before. His focus is not whether you follow him so much as it is whether you are following the way, him being the way in the sense that he is the logos of God, and the logos is concerned with the treatment of the oppressed, the downtrodden, the poor. Anyway, Logan says, I consider myself ex-Christian even though I still love and work with Jesus and the Creator, as we were just talking about. I just don't believe Jesus died for sins. I realize a lot of Christians are hypocrites and I didn't want to be associated with that. I'm also gay and trans, so the church doesn't really love me. Well, the Episcopalian church does. I grew up and was confirmed Episcopal. Okay, so right, I'm also confirmed Episcopalian at this point. Episcopalians are awesome. But when you walk up to a church and it's got this on it, you're in for a good time, right? They are very much like, you know what, we actually understand the concept of love everyone, Granted, each church is going to be different. Depends also a lot on region. People in more conservative regions, I don't mean that necessarily politically, but I mean more like traditional conservative areas are probably going to not be the same as our super progressive ass up here. But, that kind of thing. So, right, don't believe Jesus died for sins. There's honestly a lot of theologians that also debate this a lot, that also have a lot of I don't know if that's actually what it was getting at. And has been also that concept been used to browbeat people, to make people feel guilt and shame for things that they just can't conceptualize from a young age, right? Telling children that someone died for you because you're a terrible person. Crazy thing to do. Don't do that. No. But we also have realized I was queer at 13, left my homophobic church, and went straight to Hellpole, which is Hellenic polytheism, the worship of the Greek gods. Now I've kind of made a loop because I practice Italian and Appalachian folk magic as well, so I guess you could call me Christo-pagan, but I'm still primarily pagan. And so Italian and Appalachian folk magic, right? Appalachia being that region in America, we're in the South, or rather the middle, not quite the South, but over here, map. And then Italian folk magic. These are both heavily syncretic traditions. And they have, like most syncretic traditions in folk magic, a Catholic or Christian veneer on top of what is very obviously, bits and pieces kind of put together from people just trying to live their lives across many different cultures, languages, and all these other kinds of things. Okay, so I knew something wasn't right when people got all sanctimonious about sin because I knew Jesus wasn't like that. Yeah. Right? So people getting really up in their britches and telling on themselves psychologically with sin over there. I once again cannot find it. It is somewhere in here, but I'm going to hold up actually this book, The Death of Omnipotence and the Birth of Amipotence by Thomas J. Ord. This book is about making the case that God actually is not all-powerful, that God requires our cooperation to make change in the world. And so obviously sometimes in the Bible that doesn't seem to be the case. He's just hurling fucking rocks at Sodom and Gomorrah. But other times, God requires our help, right? With Moses. He needs Moses to do this stuff. Like, yes, he's the one doing the plagues, but he needs Moses to also kind of be that liaison. He's working with Moses here. He's taking Moses to be the leader out of here and setting all that up. And there are many other stories like that as well, right? Where God is not just single-handedly just going ahead while the Israelites are chilling at base camp and just destroying enemies. He's going with small groups of soldiers, he and the soldiers together, right? There's a cooperative nature of this that also aligns a lot with mysticism, the idea of becoming the hands and feet of God and these kinds of things. And I think that's because God doesn't want to be lobbing fireballs at people anymore. I think it's because God wants to, like a bird of paradise, right? Like a bird of paradise dances at the ladies, try to woo us into correct behavior, woo us into following him and being with him and lining up with the vision and the things he's trying to do. Not threaten us with hellfire and blah, 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 but literally be like, hey, but think of all the things we could do together, right? That kind of thing instead. And so when people are saying, well, why didn't God stop all this? Well, because people are actively working against God and the people that are working for God, right? Because this concept of free will is paramount. Because this concept of people doing what they want is paramount, and God is working within the rules he set up, right? And all loving, again, that's still a thing. That's what amipotence means. He's all loving. He suffers with us, weeps with us, dies with us. That's why the gospel story is so important. And so I notice a lot of these witches, and again, I've heard other testimonies too. I've heard other people when they finally leave and then Jesus is back and they're like, where did you come from? Where were you before, right? A lot of these stories of people kind of making a big circle where they're not Christian again, but they kind of figure out who God really is. And it seems like God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit reveal themselves more to the people who are either actively trying to walk away from them or who are not looking for them, versus these people who are more content to make up an idea of Jesus that serves them rather than actually follow Jesus. So, and there are a lot of things, a lot of commonalities between all these things. Abuse, being rejected for who they are, right, with the LGBTQ community and everything else. Serious body shame and shame for lifestyle and shame for sexuality and shame for, likes and dislikes. I've known a lot of people who will rag on folks for dressing alternative or something as satanic, blah, blah, blah. All this kind of stuff, right? We have all these things going on, and we also have mentions of manipulation, right? Of, basically, don't question me, just believe this. Don't think about it, just believe it. And also the Bible camp with the manipulative experiences, I've heard other people talk about these things, cry nights and stuff like that. And in all of these things, there is that, oh, hi, Squanch. In all of these things, there is that push to get people to believe, not with facts, not with scholarship, not with actual sound theology, not with a genuine fostering of love and connection between neighbors, but with threats, manipulation, violence, with strict rules and boundaries that bind people, again, not to a right state of mind, but just a right mask of behavior. And that, I encourage everyone wholeheartedly to abandon. That kind of Christianity that is focused on this kind of brain-deleting, body-policing behavior, get it out of here. Get it out of here. That's not spiritually healthy, that's not mentally healthy, not emotionally healthy. None of it. So we've just gone over many, many stories, which again, right, is different in many ways, yet same in many of the core ways. My own experience as a Christian witch is that I thankfully grew up with parents who were focused more on the love one another, be a good person, were never very strict about how I needed to act or dress or this or that, never cared if I was part of the LGBTQ or not, didn't care about any of that. My parents just cared about, hey, do you love God? And are you a good person? Yeah? Cool, right? You know? And I think that's what made me able to still cling so hard to God, even as I, like many others that we talked about, that we read from here, were lured towards witchcraft and, magic and the whimsy of it and the fantasy of it and the fun of it, and all these things. I was very much interested in all those things, could not let go of God. Not because, again, I was feeling threatened to not, but because God, for me, felt like home. God felt like peace. God felt like family. And always had, and especially in my culture, just feels like family. Doesn't feel like this threatening, overbearing, dude in the sky. And so I wasn't going to let him go for anything, but I was going to pester him all day long about witchcraft. And that's all she freaking wrote, because now you could see where we're all sitting here. You could see what has come of this pestering. But all that to say, yeah, when I listen to ex-witches to Christians, again, there are some times where I'm like, yeah, if you're feeling this way, you should stop. You should stop doing witchcraft if you feel depressed, if you feel scared, if you feel stressed. It's clearly not a path for you, and that's okay. But likewise, I wish Christians would extend that same grace to people who experience this level of abuse and just mismanagement, manipulation, and so on, and recognize why people would not want anything to do with the institution of Christianity, even if they still come to really appreciate Jesus in the end of the day. If they realized that, if they understood this, then it'd be maybe a little bit easier for them to, first of all, look at the plank in their own eye rather than the speck in someone else's. And second of all, make it easier for them to approach others they consider not like them in love, to erase those definitions, those divides between witch and Christian, and just recognize each other as human. So I invite anyone else also to share your stories down below. Maybe we can keep this going and we can kind of make these every now and then where we share our stories and we share why we don't identify as Christian anymore, or why we got into witchcraft, or any of these other things. I think that's something that is missing a lot from this space that we need. So let me know what you think, and I will see you guys next time for some more good chats. See ya!